All right, well, welcome everyone to the Digital Citizenship and Safety presentation. I'm Mr. Casal. This is brought to you by the Heathcote Health and Wellness Committee of the Heathcote PTA. So we're going to go through some slides. We're going to then have some Q&A. We'll go through some more slides. It'll be a conversation as well as a presentation. And everything here will be available on my blog, in addition to the slides with all the links and all the materials that are covered. So to kind of kick us off, go through just some basic stuff. And the biggest thing is that this isn't really about the way I view it, digital safety and citizenship. This is about, there it is. This is about appropriate technology use, because we're sort of past this notion about everything being just about one or two things. It's not just we have to be safe or we have to be good citizens. It's about what does that mean overall? What's the overarching thing, which is more, it's about appropriate use of all this stuff, because you're not always connected, even when you're connected. Sometimes when you feel like you're not connected, you're still connected. So that's why it's really about appropriate use. And we're going to go over all this. The quick disclaimer is I'm catering this to the home user. So I'm not going to really be talking about anything we do in school in terms of firewalls or protections and stuff, because we have enterprise level stuff. We pay lots of money to manage devices, control apps, limit access. Our district firewall is big. These are things that we do at a large scale level, like any organization would, whether it be a school district, a company. This is not sort of the aim of this. This is kind of more catered to the parent-child relationship, sort of the parent-home expectations, things like that. Those links at the bottom of the slide do link to the district information and do link to a blog post on my blog that I give to the students every year, where they have to go through and look, and we talk about the different things that the district has and controls and stuff like that. So you can go do that. This is going to be, again, sort of more focused on the parent home type angle. So just to give people context who may not know me or may not be familiar with my background, this is my 19th year of teaching, I guess it is. And but I was a .comer before that. I worked in rock radio before that. So my background comes from tech and comes from sort of the early days of things, broadcasting concerts, moving then into live streaming of things back in the 90s, and working in the very, very early days of streaming media. So I have sort of been on both sides of this fence. I've been on the cutting edge of it from a technology standpoint. And then I was on the cutting edge of it from an instructional standpoint, as students, as these things that I had been working with in my corporate life started to make their way into my new career when I became a teacher. I do have two children. My son is a fourth grader at Quaker Ridge. My daughter is a sixth grader at the middle school. So it's not, what I'm talking to you about here is not just sort of a theoretical in terms of here's what you may or may not do, or here's what I do in this other place, but I am here. I am in this in the exact same form and fashion that all Heathcote parents are. In terms of family devices, they each have their own Chromebooks, which we bought them a number of years ago, just to kind of introduce the concept. I think my son was a first or second grader when we first got him, and we waited till just before Christmas one year when those particular Chromebooks were down to, I think, $135 or something. They were not very expensive devices, but it was a way just to kind of give them some entry-level devices that they could have at home where they can kind of ease into it. And then as time has gone on, we have done other things. iPod touches, we've got, old iPhones that we've turned into iPod touches. Of course, we have streaming services. And I put the streaming services on the family devices because I feel like this is part of this new world we're living in, where the television is a device in a way that it never used to be. Because in the past, the TV was, it was on, it was off, it was whatever was on broadcast, right? Whatever NBC, ABC, CBS was airing at that moment. But now we have these smart TVs where you can have Netflix on them, you can have Amazon Prime on them, you can have all these other apps. So your TV now is a device in and of itself. So you may think, oh, well, we don't have any devices at home because we only have like the parent iPhones and the kids on our devices. But if the kids have access to a TV, that's a smart TV, that is a device. There are apps on that television that are functioning much the same way they would on an iPad or a computer. So it's sort of good to think about these things in those terms, because they're, the idea of what we all came up with is now vastly different for what our children are coming up with. And we do have one Nintendo Switch. My son's into it, you know, that's an easy thing to manage. Nintendo's great about, you know, their parental controls, setting the time limits and stuff like that. I was never a big gamer growing up, so the video game thing is not big in my house. I was a film and television major, so that's definitely where we are in terms of what my house is sort of focused on, is like the music from my rock radio career and the film and television, just watching TVs and films, because that was kind of where I came from. But so to get this conversation started, I love playing a little snippet of this, because this is a fun video. All right, so I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it's a great video. The thing I love about this video is that everyone watches it and is like, oh yeah, totally. This is my kids. I get this. This resonates with me. This is the world we're living in. What's really awesome about this video is that this video is really old. This video is from, whoops, just pause that. This video is from, oh, and it's not showing. This video is actually from 2014. So this is now 7 years old, right? This is from, it's actually almost even more than that. I just sort of popped this out real quick, so I want you to see. It's actually February 2014 is when that video aired. So you're talking about a video that resonates with people. It's like, oh yeah, that's totally my kid. Well, that kid in that video basically is like a third grader now, right? Second, third grader. So like, this is not a new concept. It may be a new concept for some of us who have these younger kids, where we're sort of first seeing this as parents. But as far back as 2014, you might have had kids who were born in 2009, 8, where it was resonating with those parents. So this is not, don't feel like, oftentimes I feel like parents come to me and they're like, well, I don't know what to do. This is so new to us. And it's like, I get that. It is new to you, but it is not new. So there's background and there's context and there's support and there's historical reference basically for everything that we're going through and sort of how to manage it. So then, so if I skip ahead to the next one, this is another fun one. We'll play a couple seconds of this. The baby's trying to pinch and zoom the magazine. Right. So everyone looks at that and is like, oh, that's so funny. That's like, you know, really new. No, it's actually not really new. That was actually 2011. So that one's even older. The iPad came out basically 2000, and the iPhone even, right? 2010. This is like the early stages of this. So 2011, we're in 2021. This is definitely a middle schooler now. So this is somebody who has really come up with this all the way through. And I love that the father who made this has kept it there. This is also a fun thing, right? What gives students an unfair advantage? You know, what gives students an unfair advantage to analyze data? Because we always talk about back in our day, right? Back, it was easier in our day. It was easier, you know, when we didn't have to worry about this stuff. You know, it was different and it was a different era. Sure, except that was computers give students an unfair advantage, and computers to analyze data, you can't be like, you're going to eliminate them. What? Like, that was 1998. That wasn't that long ago. That was actually, I started my .com career in like 1997, right? So that was like that's like the birth of the internet. They were saying that computers shouldn't be used for those things. And it wasn't just anybody. I mean, that was, a major science fair judge that was tied to Apple. So like, but nowadays we can't imagine analyzing data without a computer, right? Because we can analyze more data, and we want kids to learn how to analyze data, right? We want kids to learn how to use, Excel and use spreadsheets to analyze data. So 1998 seems like a million years ago, but at the same time, that was kind of the birth of this new world that we live in with the internet. So the point is, like, we have to always sort of temper our immediate reactions or responses and think about the fact that there has always been someone before us that has had the same issue. And a lot of the things that we sort of take for granted or are totally comfortable with now, not too long ago, somebody was very uncomfortable with this. And this matters in terms of how we interact with our kids, because, we always have to think about temper our responses, because they are growing up with different contexts and different constructs of what's normal, because the internet isn't really even about the internet anymore, and it hasn't been for years. I mean, I remember a time when in the 90s, early 2000s, it was all about the website address you had, right? Every company was like trying to get like the coolest URL name. Then Instagram came along. Instagram didn't have a website for like the first year of its existence. They were an app. That's how they started. There was no website. Now everyone is comfortable with this, and we all know this, but for the longest time, apps were a new thing, and people didn't understand, like, how do you have an app but not a website? How do you not have a web presence? And this is why when we think about these things and we think about stuff like internet safety and digital citizenship, it's not just about the computer, and it's not just about a website. It's about these interactions and these connections on other things, on very sort of siloed things that are very purposeful. The internet's like this big wide open thing, but a lot of times for our kids, they don't, like, my daughter's in middle school. She doesn't use the internet the way we might. She uses apps, right? She goes between her different apps. So for her, her idea or notion of what the internet is vastly different than how it was when a lot of us came up. So it's always about having to like recenter myself with her to be like, all right, wait, what's that? What did you say? Oh, that's this app. Oh, right. Okay. Remind me. Because I sort of instinctually will default to thinking in terms of a website, and then I can go to that website. Whereas often you can't do that. You have to say, hey, let me see your device. Let me see which app you're talking about, because those apps are specific to the device, and they're specific to that user, specific to that login. It's not as easy as it once was, where you can just kind of go to a website and look it up and kind of get a sense of what it is. Often you really just have to look at the actual physical app. And that connection is important, because that connection isn't just about the user with the app. In our case, it's about the parents and the kids. And it's about the connection between the parents and the kids to understand which apps are on the child's device. The connection of mom and dad have an expectation of how you're going to use this app. We will take the app off if it's not used this way. The connections are not just about internet connections or digital connections. All of this is like intrapersonal connections. That's what all of this is about. It's about students connecting to one another. They're in a world where they don't know, my daughter, up until she's in middle school now, so she doesn't say it anymore, but the big cute thing in the family was when she would go to my wife's office, she'd say, oh, I get to talk on the cord phone today. Because my daughter, who's only 11, had no context for a non-cordless phone. Because until she was like 6 or whatever it was, when she went into my wife's office, she had never seen a phone with a cord. Because we barely had a phone at home. It was a cordless phone. And then we had cell phones. So the cord phone was this cool thing. All of us on this call probably hate phones with cords because we keep getting tripped up over them. For her, it's a novelty. It's that connection. She's connecting to these things differently. And then we have to connect with our kids sort of in the analog way to understand how they're connecting with things. And that's really important because it is different than just what we did. Now, this is the corner I grew up in. Like, I'm from Brooklyn. My family's from Brooklyn. My grandmother came to this country in 1913 and settled in Brooklyn. Like, my family's been in that neighborhood for a million years. This was my internet as a kid. I connected. That first stoop right there on the right was a stoop I grew up on. That's my grandmother's building. My mother grew up in this neighborhood too, so it was different for her because she understood this construct. Her entire family, that side of the family was from this neighborhood. My father grew up in Spanish Harlem. He grew up differently. For him, growing up, hanging out outside had a different context or a different construct. For him, hanging out on the corner had a much more negative and vastly different set of implications. For me, this was the neighborhood meeting spot. This is where you connected. My grandmother had been in that neighborhood forever. She was 97 when she passed away. Everyone knew her. Everyone knew that was her stoop. She'd sit there and that was the internet. People would come by, people would talk to her. She would see people and wave, people would honk. That's the connection. This was the neighborhood internet. My grandmother was like the neighborhood Facebook. Like, she knew everybody. People would say, hey, like, can you put a sign? My grandmother would do butcher paper, hang it up in the window, and she'd write like apartment for rent when she had to rent one of her apartments. Got to the point where people would ask her, hey, can you put up my phone number and the fact that my building around the corner, I got an apartment for rent. So like, my grandmother was like the first next door app. You know, my grandmother was the first Facebook marketplace. Stoop sales, right? I grew up with stoop sales. My kids now have no concept of this. I got to bring them back to the old neighborhood like once every couple of months to like remind them of what the internet was before it was an internet. And again, that's that connection. They would think it would be weird to sit there all day and watch the neighborhood go by. I think it's weird for them to sit on their device and text their friends all day. But we were doing the same thing, right? They're connecting with their friends. They're engaging, they're interacting. I did it on a corner in Brooklyn. I did it on my grandmother's stoop. So it was different. You know, they go, like, my daughter this morning, she was waiting for the bus. I'm leaving. She's like, Dad, can I get some money? I want to go to Golden Horseshoe after. When I was a kid, I got $1.10. And then basically the dollar was for the Spalding ball, and the 10 cents was to call home when I needed something. That was it, right? And generally, Spaldings, you might even get them for 50 cents, and then you get the little like 25-cent, you know, bright orange drink with the tinfoil top and something else. She's going to Starbucks, right? And Scoop Shop. Same results, but vastly different ways of approaching it, right? So I have to sort of step back and be like, what do you mean you go to Starbucks and get a purple beverage, right? I don't have that construct, but she's doing exactly what I did as a kid. Instead of playing stoop ball with the Spalding and using that dime to call home, she's going to Starbucks with her iPhone and $20. You know, it's a different dynamic, but she's doing the same thing. She's connecting. And that's part of what this is about sort of just knowing and recognizing that it's not just solely about the internet, and it's not just solely about a device. It's about how are we using these things, and how are they having the same experience we did, just with different stuff? Because that's the big thing. We may have all had access to all of these things, but it was always like one friend of yours had the Walkman, and a different friend had the video camera, and a different friend had the thing. And you got all your friends together and you got all your stuff together. You made like the one video, and it took you like 19 months, and maybe it got done, maybe it didn't. Now, and that was 2007, right? We're how many years past this, where now friends can get together and make TikTok videos, make YouTube videos. The same thing, they're content creators. And that's sort of the big thing is, are they using these to create content? Are they, even if we may not necessarily agree with the content that they're creating, or even if we think it's vapid, or even if we think it's meaningless, are they going through that same process we did, where they're sort of gathering their resources to create something? They just have better resources and can create more and create faster than we did. You know, back in the 90s, it was like, you know, rolling with crates of stuff. I used to travel to trade shows and I would set up broadcast booths where we would live stream events. We would ship truckloads of gear. If I were to do that today, I'd probably bring like 3 iPads and a couple of tripods. Like I'd have it in a backpack and it would do the same thing. So just because they're making like YouTube videos with their friends, or it seems to be meaningless, they're still sort of creating a meaning. They're just doing it in a different way. And this is just a quick sort of overview of how things have changed, right? There wasn't a whole lot that happened between like the 60s and the 90s. There were small iterations. April 3rd, 2010, the iPad. Like, I stopped there because we're 11 years later. Is that what it is? Oh my God. Like, it's bananas, because now we have TVs that have the internet on the TVs. We're on the iPhone 13. We're on Bluetooth mice and keyboards are everywhere. Like it is exploded, and it changes in such a rate where now every single year we expect something new. Like, we didn't really expect a whole lot between 1964 and 1994, right? There wasn't like this massive expectation of something. Now there's constantly things. So these are these big questions, and I'll pause in just a minute, sort of see where folks are at. But like, how are we adapting to this, not only in our own use, but understanding the difference between how we came up and how we are invested in these things, and how our children are coming up and how they're invested in these things, and how are we navigating that difference? Because things are moving so much faster, right? The iPhone 13 comes out and we are blown away as adults. Our kids are like, I'm gonna wait for the 14, because they know that we're living in this now yearly cycle of major upgrades. Like, for them, the thing today is not the coolest thing. They know it's going to be kind of obsolete next year, because they're more savvy than we are, because we didn't come up in this time where things were constantly happening. Like, we had a VCR that I remember was a big deal when my father like drove out to Bay Ridge to go buy it, and like we waited on my grandmother's stoop for it to come back. That was the same VCR we had for like 17 years. We didn't get anything else. There was nothing else to get. But now, video game systems, right? New iPhones, new iPad. It's different. Their context is different, and it's not that they just want these things because they want them. It's the world that we're all living in. They just don't have a different context for shorter rollouts of advancements. And I made this years ago, but it still so much applies that now my son, who's 9, is still like, meh, I'll wait till next year. Because he's like, the thing that this year is not that great. And I'm like, but oh my God, it can do so many things. And he's like, nah, next year, this new thing's coming out. It's like, okay. They have different understandings and different contexts for all these things. So what I'll do is I'm going to stop the share for a minute, and I will unspotlight or take off focus mode. So that way, see if there's any, any questions. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, you have that reactions button. You can click that reactions button and raise a hand if you have a specific question. And keep going, talk about some more things, but I wanted to give everyone a moment to see if anyone had something that we've talked about so far.
I'll just say it's such great perspective, both in terms of our own technology lives and our own childhoods and that whole piece, but also thinking about how this whole part of their lives, the technology is for our kids. So thanks for taking us here so far on the journey.
Yeah, no problem. And that's really the thing, is all this stuff is perspective. So now we'll jump into a little bit of the boring stuff, and I'm going to kind of go through it pretty quickly. But again, this presentation will be available with all these links, so you can kind of dive into it more, because there is a bunch of research and links to research and stuff like that. And the research changes. There's also been a sort of a change in research focus lately, obviously, because there's been COVID and a lot of the research. And as I was updating this presentation, a lot of the newer research or newer articles are more about, virtual learning, the socialization stuff. It's more like specifically COVID focused as opposed to like general technology use. So what I'll do is I'll just kick this back this way and then share this again, because before we move on, and I know that this always becomes a question, is, so we have all this stuff, right? There's all this stuff happening. What is, how do I do this? Like, how do I navigate from, the technology is the worst that my children will know, to how do I protect them? How do I do whatever? How do I manage this? Well, like I always, the best firewall is a conversation, and the best apps are clear expectations. Everyone always asks me, like, what's the app that you use? There is no app. We talk to our kids and we set clear expectations for our kids. There is no piece of technology that is going to be better than the human. And I say this to the students all the time. I always ask them, who's smarter, you or the computer? And generally by second grade, those who have known me will know that they all will answer, they are, because it's true. Kindergartners and first graders tend to always think that the computer's smarter. And it's not. And that's not something that I just tell kids. It's true. Technology, computers can be programmed to do things faster, right? Mathematical equations, it'll do a billion, processes in a second, whatever, fine. It's quicker. It doesn't mean that it's smarter per se. A human had to program it to get to that point. Even if we're talking about, let's say, artificial intelligence, yes, but humans are still there sort of building that technology, right? Humans are still having those conversations. Something like, how do I make sure they don't go on the wrong thing? You can do apps, but then you start getting these crazy levels of management. Clear expectations. Have the conversation with your kids. I don't want you going on X, Y, or Z. And if you do, you're gonna lose your device, right? I can't, you're in trouble, you're grounded, I'm taking your device away. There's nothing that has to say that they need devices in the room. There's no rule about that. There's no law. Talk to them about it. And these things can change. Like what we did with my kids when they were 5 and 7 is different than what they are at 9 or 11, but we still have the conversations with them. We still have clear expectations. They still know that if dad has to ask twice, that's a problem and they're losing stuff. Because that's always been the clear expectation, is don't make me ask a second time. So as time has gone on, we have conversations about, they come and say, hey, listen, can I go do this work in my room? Okay. Keep your door open. Don't turn the music up too loud. Don't make me ask twice if I need you. No problem. And then you sort of build that trust and you build that understanding that they then can ask and say, listen, my brother is working in his room, you're on the TV, it's a little bit loud. Do you mind if I close my door? Okay, set a timer, 10 minutes, let me know where you're at, right? You can have these conversations and set these expectations, and that's how you manage the use. And that's how you work on building that understanding that there's a responsibility with the technology and that it's not just using things. No app is going to teach your kids how to do the right thing or how to know when is enough. That's where those conversations and expectations come in. And that's where you have those ongoing. Now, there's a ton of stuff from, this was back in 2016. They did a big survey talking basically about technology use is fine as long as it's appropriate, right? You don't do a lot with little kids, but there's also a difference between watching YouTube videos and talking to grandma on the other side of the world. Because even a 2-year-old, if they're FaceTiming with grandma who lives in another country who has a different native language, and they're talking in that other language, then that's great for that young child. Even if they're on for half an hour, if they're learning another language and they're interacting with this relative that they wouldn't otherwise, then that's completely different than them spending 30 minutes playing a video game. There's different types of content, different types of consumption. And again, if you are sitting there connecting with a relative on FaceTime, they're learning how to, talk to an adult. They're building that relationship with someone they don't always see. They're understanding how to do a Zoom call or a FaceTime. They're understanding some etiquette of digital conversing, right? There's all these underlying skills. So it's much different between, I'm just going to let them watch Paw Patrol for 3 hours, and we have this aunt in Germany who will speak German to my child, and then that will help my child develop additional language skills. Like, that's awesome, and that's a completely different set of expectations. And then things like media free times, like we do that. There's zero stuff during the week. My kids don't get to. They don't get 1 hour. They don't get 10 minutes. Now, we tried giving them, you're done with your homework, you get half an hour. Well, it didn't really work, because then they started chipping at each other. The homework wasn't really getting done, so we got rid of it. Friday, Saturday, we let them go overboard a little bit, but we understand that there are media free times. We have dinner times. Sometimes we'll do things together. We'll watch a movie together. So they're still having that sort of screen time per se, but that's like a family movie, which is a different type of screen time. So about understanding the differences of these things. They did update their research in 2018, basically the same stuff. These components are integral to our world. And this is pre-COVID. Now imagine how much more. Can you imagine having gone through spring of 2020 and now without things like the internet and Zoom, for as bad and difficult and imperfect as they may or may not have been? What if we didn't have them? Right? What if there was no internet? What if this happened in 1994? What would have happened? Would giant Xeroxed packets of paper be dropped off at everyone's doorstep? Or would people just have not done, what would have occurred? We had access to these things, and this allowed us to at least transition and at least have a continuity of life that we couldn't have had without these things. So we can't discount their place in our society and our lives. Things like media use plans for your family, right? This goes back to that conversation. My wife looked at them. She brought home one day. She's like, we have all this stuff we could talk about. We do all these things. And I was like, look, honestly, for me as a teacher, elementary school teacher, I'm like, simple expectations. Ask permission. I should never have to ask you twice to stop it or pause it or come or whatever. And don't let me catch you doing something bad. Right? Like, that's it. Like, simple, clear. So for us, that worked, because I think my children also think I'm nuts enough that when I say to them, or when I said to them when they were like 5, if you're on it for too long, I'll throw it away. I think they thought I was nuts enough to actually throw it away, which is fine, because it allowed us to set these expectations. No, I would not have actually thrown a device away, but they don't know that. And they don't watch these, so it's okay. And limits are really important. It's like anything. Like, we have limits in school. I know that the kids have one-to-one devices, and everyone thinks that means they're on them all the time. They're not. Even when they come into the computer lab, it's like, log in, do this thing for 5 minutes, and then when the timer goes off, like, let's refocus, let's talk about the next step. You have limits, and you have expectations, and you have time, and even like stuff like playtime, like, they may say, I want to play on the device. All right, look, what do you want to, don't just say no. So what do you want to play? Like, tell me how that's different than what you've been doing. And when they say, oh, this is how it's different, you say, okay, go outside, take the dog for a walk, go to the park for 30 minutes, set a time or whatever, come back. Then I'll give you the same 30 minutes you had with the dog outside. I'll give you 30 minutes to try out that new app you want to try out. You can set those expectations and sort of those give and takes so that they understand that they don't just get what they want all the time. There may have to be some give and take. And you have that and say, listen, why don't we, like, I love the snow, and my family loves the winter. So often when there's snow, they're like, can I go on my device? We're like, I want you to go outside till you can't feel your face. And then they'll go, oh, you're so mean, dad. And then they go outside, they play for 2 hours and they love it. My kids play together, snowballs, build forts, whatever. They come back in and they're like, oh my God, that was so much fun. I won't even bring up the device. My wife won't bring it up. We'll wait till they say something. And then they'll have some hot chocolate, whatever. Oh, hey, do you mind if we go on a device? We're like, no problem. Because we know they went out, and sort of letting them, if you say, hey, go out for half an hour and then I'll give you something, and they're out there for 35 minutes, let them roll. Don't go and get them. Let them have that time and let them explore, because you can explore on the device and on the internet, but you can also explore those differences in, I'm having fun in the moment. I'm not going to stop my fun in the moment to go do something else that I wanted before, which is also just good in terms of them understanding delayed gratification, understanding how to manage impulse control and stuff like that. There's a lot else that goes into that, and all these things are tied together. Like I said, the alone time, like family movie night is good. Being the good role model, like dinner time, put the phones in the basket. Like, we don't have phones out. They're always off to the side. Now the other thing too is, like, we're not super militant about it. We're flexible and understanding that if the kids are sitting there and we're talking about something, and we're talking about, let's say, vaccines, right? Because this is like an in the news thing and it's relevant. And if the kids start asking questions, we'll say, hey, listen, I'm going to go get my phone. Let's look this up and let's find out. We won't shy away from the device at a family movie or a family like dinner, let's say, but we're not going to sit there and scroll through Instagram while we're together having dinner. But if the kids are asking a question and it's like, hey, I wonder about this. Do you know about that? Oh, I learned about this in school. I want to learn more. Then those are appropriate times that they then learn and see that you can have a conversation and explore a topic without the device. But you may get to a point where the device becomes integral to that conversation and will help extend it. And we've had some great long dinners where it starts out with no devices, and midway through we end up talking about something where we end up Googling stuff and researching, and the kids are looking it up, and then we end up having a much longer dinner with the device as a component, not as a main focus, so that they're seeing that you can have those interactions where it's person to person, but you can also get an added benefit of extension with the device itself. And again, face-to-face communication. So all this is in here. Tech-free zones, like I said, dinner table. But I like to be flexible with that, because if it matters and if it helps the conversation, the emotional pacifier, I think, is a big thing. Kids are fussing, struggling, whatever. Just say, oh, go watch a video. Like, that's really not the thing, because then that's going to become the default, right? That's going to be the default. Like, oh, if I just act like a pain in the butt, then mom will give me the iPad, and then they'll do it just whether they mean it or not. So we always say to them, like, oh, you're fussing? Like, well, I just need to calm down. Can I watch something? I'm like, no, you can calm down and stop fussing, and then I'll maybe let you watch something. Because again, that's then about that impulse control, right? And it's about getting them to understand that the device can't be the fallback or the default or the de facto thing, that they understand, like, you know what, why don't you having a moment? Go have your moment. Have your moment outside. Have your moment in the basement. Have your moment somewhere. Go do your thing. Chill out. Take a breath. Take a nap. Come back to me when you're chill, and then we can talk about whether or not you're going to be allowed to watch something. And that's very important. And it's tough. It's like when the kids were babies and you're training them to sleep, and it's like, it's a struggle, but like, you have to go through those processes. Common Sense Media is a great website and a great resource for finding things and sort of exploring. And it's a great opportunity. I have some stuff on the Heathcote Gateway that I do with kids about digital citizenship that I got from Common Sense Media. And just sort of understanding that they're going to mess up. They are, but that goes back to those conversations, right? Be watching them, have the expectations. They mess up. They didn't meet the expectation. They get the consequence, but then the next day, the next hour, whatever it is, you move on and you learn from it, and you use those conversations to sort of help them understand how to improve next time. This is an old infographic. They haven't updated it in a while, but I think it's sort of still very relevant. And it's just about, how much parents use stuff. And a lot of times we project sort of our fears onto our kids, or what we're doing onto our kids, and say, well, it's different for me because I'm not you. It's like, sure. But at the same time, they're watching us and they're learning from us. So we have to be a little bit more cognizant about, maybe using it less when we're on the couch, or maybe using it less when we're going to bed and things like that. So that way, when they see us, they're understanding that there are times when it gets put away, because we do model everything, and they do learn from us. So it's tough for them to understand the distinction. And it's right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. But if they're always seeing us on a device, which, but it's work, but it's work. They're like, okay, but it's fun, but it's fun, but it's schoolwork. But like it becomes this thing of, we have to understand that we're modeling for them, and we have to try to just be, good in front of them. And I found this, and this is a recent update, which is really interesting. So it was just, I was just going through a bunch of research. So this is interesting. This is a recent update from Common Sense. And like, as you can see, TV has dropped in terms of usage, but online video has gone up. They're almost like the same thing. It's more just about how it's being disseminated, because look at streaming. The amount of streaming people do in a sitting is basically the same. So again, it goes back to that notion of like, it's not like that we didn't do it in the past. It's just that we're doing it different now. And the method is different, and the consumption is different. So it's, again, that context for what we're doing. And then just some other, sort of quick, sort of updated figures. The one on the left is about average screen time, has remained steady for some economic brackets, and it's gone up slightly, not a lot, in others. And also the one on the right, that in general, it helps, right? Most people do believe it helps, and it does help, because they have access to things they wouldn't otherwise. They have the ability to learn things they couldn't otherwise. The social skills, right? As much as we've been inside and sequestered and locked down in the last like 18 months, 2 years, devices have allowed our kids to stay connected. Whereas if they didn't have the devices, they would have been alone in their houses. Now, I get that it's an imperfect situation, but it's better than not having the device, right? If I was sitting on my grandmother's stoop during this, or if I wasn't allowed to go to my grandmother's stoop, I might not see anybody for who knows how long. I might not talk to a peer for who knows how long. But the fact that we now have these things, I can still learn. I can still be creative. I can still socialize, even if I'm alone and in my house. I still have the ability to make those connections. And that's an important part about this. So I know it kind of comes down to all this, and I know I haven't talked a lot in very specifics about like an app or a website, because again, like I said, I really don't, I think it's more than that. And I think it's about not focusing solely on a tool, because then those tools go away. Conversations, right? Like, you have to talk about these things, and you have to sit there with your kids, and you got to look over their shoulder, and you have to let them know that like they should come to you when that thing happens on their device. Even if they're like, oh my God, I'm gonna get in trouble. Be like, look, you're not gonna get in trouble till you get in trouble. You hide something and I find it, you're really gonna be in trouble. Something happens, you're unsure about it, makes you nervous. Come to me, I won't freak out right away. Like, give me a minute. Let me look at it. Let me see. Explain to me how you got there. Now, be honest. If you did it, we're gonna have problems. You'll take your lumps and you'll move on, and the next day you'll be fine. But also, things happen. Like I tell the kids, and what I teach the kids at Heathcote is, there's 2 things on the internet. That's it. There's only 2. No matter how many Google searches you do, no matter how many streaming services you have, there's only 2 things on the internet. There's good and there's garbage, and that's it. And it doesn't mean that everything is automatically good that is appropriate, or everything garbage is inappropriate. At any given moment, what you're looking for and what you want is the good, right? I look up Apple and I get links to iPads and stuff, but I really wanted to go Apple picking. Then those apple.com websites are garbage to me in that moment. And it's about understanding that you're going to see garbage. And it's always funny, like my first couple of years here when I was still living in Brooklyn, like to understand, well, yeah, when you're walking down the street, you see garbage on the street. And kids are like, what do you mean you walk down the street? I'm like, oh yeah, right. Suburbs, cars. There's like a different notion, right? Like growing up in Brooklyn, I was like, oh yeah, you'd always see trash on the street. The sanitation can on the corners overflowing. I'm like, you don't look in it. You don't go rooting through it. It's garbage. You move on with life. Internet's the same way. You're going to see it, move on. If you're concerned about something you see in the garbage can on the street corner, you tell an adult, say, hey, listen, I saw something that's concerning in the garbage can. Same thing with the internet. And you have to have that conversation with the kids to let them know that it's okay for them to come to you to say, listen, I don't know what this is about. I don't know. Like, all right, no problem. Let's talk about it. And those things, because you don't want them to sort of go down this rabbit hole alone. They need to know that they can explore a little bit, but that they can come back to you to get some guidance and get some assistance. But they should also know that if they go down that rabbit hole alone and hide things from you and it comes out, that's the bad thing. Like, that's going to be where stronger consequences. It's an older infographic, 2017. Most of those websites are still in existence. Some aren't. Things come and go. The 2021 links are up to date, which is interesting because you look at like 2017 and it's like, oh look, Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all those things. Whereas 2021, they're talking about artificial intelligence. They're talking about the Internet of Things. It's like, oh my God, like a couple of years ago, we were just talking about how do we share things on a website or an app. Now we're talking about augmented reality. We're talking about virtual reality. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about, tweeting from our refrigerators while it's playing Spotify. Like, it changes fast, and it's about just understanding how to sort of navigate this and talk about it. Like, this was from 2018. These are all these different services that do stuff. You are never going to understand it all. You're never going to know what it all is. You're never going to block it all. Odds are you're barely going to use 2% of it, right? Same thing with your kids. It's like, the fire hose concept, right? The internet's the fire hose. You can't drink from you can stick your head in the fire hose. You're going to get overwhelmed. You drink water from a glass, right? You understand that, like, okay, maybe like the river is where the water in your glass comes from, but you kind of filter it down. Same idea. You sort of have to filter this down with the kids. Conversations, again, I can't stress that enough, right? And if it's not you, like, if you don't know if your kids will come to you, it happens, right? That's fine. But maybe there's the cousin or the uncle or the older whatever, maybe the niece or the nephew who's a few years ahead, who's gone through some struggles and come out the other side. Maybe that becomes the confidant, or maybe that becomes the resource, right? Sometimes it's hard to talk to mom and dad. I know it's really hard for my kids, and we really stress the conversation because my kids are the oldest. They're the oldest cousins. They're the oldest grandchildren. So it's tough. I know that my wife's kids look up to my kids and they ask my kids stuff. So my kids are becoming sort of those confidants. But you have to have, and it's okay if they're not so sure to talk to you. But like I said, find that family member, that somebody that they could trust, that they can go to with these questions when they're unsure about things. And that's what's key, is letting them know that they have the ability to be open and upfront with an adult that's safe and trustworthy. People always ask about restricting access. LA's iPad program is a really great example. LA, a number of years ago, bought everyone an iPad and like tried to lock everything down, which made the kids go, bet you can't. And 4 hours later, they had to get every iPad back because every kid figured out how to get around the protocols. Because any of these things are, they're susceptible. There's nothing that's great. And the amount of time and effort you're going to put in to try to do it isn't worth it. We're gonna be on our devices, right? We're never gonna talk to each other. We're never gonna socialize, except there's all these bits of evidence that all of these things, like I've said, have always happened. They've happened for generations. They've just happened differently, right? This is from like the 50s. This is the same thing as you would see today on Metro North with everyone on their phone. It's the same thing. Nothing is different. It just looks different and it feels different because we're on a different side of it. We were kids back then going, I'll never ride the subway to work. I'll never wear a suit to work. I'll never read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Yeah, of course, you say that when you're 10, but then things change and your constructs changed. So, some of our kids now are probably like, I'll never look at my iPhone on the train. And they're probably right, because by the time they come around, they're going to be staring at some hologram or something, right? They're going to have like the Oculus goggles on, like, who knows? And it's going to be the same idea. That's where that link is from, about being antisocial. But technology is social. I feel like that becomes a thing all the time, of worrying that your kids are going to sequester themselves, in a dark room somewhere and not have friends. They do. They do have friends. They'll also sequester them in a dark room. Like I remember my time, it was comic books, right? Or even just novels. Like my son now, who has access to all this stuff, will read Harry Potter. We have to put him to bed at 11:30. We're like, turn the light off. He's like, one more chapter. He has his dark little corners of the room where he goes and he plays Nintendo Switch and he connects with his friends, and you hear him yelling and screaming, talking to his friends. He's being social. But he also does it with a book, just like we did with our different variations of technology and our various outlets, so we just have to sort of keep that, as a reminder. And again, because it's all about these apps and creating, and these are just a few, but again, it's that idea that you can create, and it's not just about consumption, right? There's all these different things in this presentation where I have all these different periodic tables of different apps based on different breakdowns of content creation and stuff like that. And there's tons of these things, and there's tons of iterations of these things. It's not just about them watching things. You don't want them watching YouTube, tell them not to watch YouTube. Take the device away from them when they're not doing what they're supposed to. They want to use Comic Life to make comic books and create stories with their friends. Let them. That's a totally different use. And that's the thing is about having those conversations again and understanding expectations and appropriate use and what you deem to be appropriate use. Again, a bunch of links, Apps Gone Free, App Shopper, Common Sense Media, great resources for finding apps and sort of vetting apps. This is sort of a big one. I know a lot of times, people say, well, I'm going to wait till like it matters. I'm going to wait till, high school to let them do things. And it's like, no, because they're already doing it now, and you wouldn't let your 17-year-old get a driver's license and hand him the keys to the car right away. They ride in a car. They're passengers in a car. They see how a car is driven. They see how it's used. They sit in a car. They maybe sit in the car in the driver's seat while it's parked in the garage and pretend that they're driving. These are all similar types of things that our kids are doing with technology to get them ready for those points of independence. You're guiding them. It's the learner's permit concept, right? A bunch of things just about COPA on here, and just being careful. Anything we use in school, we've got vetted. We have privacy policies and stuff, but anything you use with your kids at home, you'll sort of want to check and verify that it sort of meets the needs of a privacy policy that you're comfortable with. Again, setting expectations with your kids, setting up sort of that transparency of they don't get to change passwords. Right? You get to know all the passwords all the time. You get to look at their stuff all the time. You pay for it. You bought it. You're the parent. Those types of things, sort of setting up these, again, conversations that set expectations, and those are going to be the best things. And this is a really old tweet that is really still relevant. And it's not, digital citizenship's really not a thing. Like we're beyond that. That baby in 2011 was pinching and zooming a magazine. Like we're so far past the concept of digital citizenship. It's got to be more about digital leaders, right? And it's not even about social media. It's just technology. I know everyone always worries about social media, but it's not. Like it's technology in general. Like it's out there. And we need to work with our kids and talk to them and help them. We would never just go, oh, go to the beach and let them go down there. We'd watch them. We'd talk to them about water safety. We talk to them. We go into the water with them. We show them how to swim. We swim and let them watch us. They want to watch us dive off the diving board. We do. We do these things with other fear factors or other points of concern. So you have to do it with the technology as well. And again, collaboration, creation. We can't just think that it's just about the social stuff or just about them being independent or alone or off on an island somewhere. They can be very creative and very social. There are some ways, I know people do always ask about restricting access. Bunch of links in here based on device about how you could like restrict time and how you set up parental controls on things. Different routers have different ways to set up restrictions. SafeSearch, YouTube. Again, these are all things that are embedded in school, but you can turn these on with your home accounts, your children's accounts. Google resources if your kids want their own personal Gmail or things like that. There's all these different little tricks for basically setting up like Google accounts, either as a family plan. The Gmail +1 trick is cool, so you can like share an inbox if you want. Things like that. You know, you can own your own family domain. Bunch of links. People always ask me about like, what do I have at home? I have this Netgear Orbi mesh router, which is also super awesome because it makes my wireless network much more reliable with all the sort of distance learning stuff. But it allows you to also, in addition, like turn off a machine. So I can just toggle off. My son for the longest time was like, and my son's a good kid. He just was like, nah. I'm like, why don't you use your iPod anymore? He's like, nah, it doesn't really work. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't work? He's like, don't worry about it. Finally, I was like, show me your iPod. I'm like, well, this is really weird. It doesn't work. Turned out I had accidentally turned off internet access to his iPod on my router. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. He's like, nah, I read Harry Potter. I'm like, okay, like that's fine. So there are the ability that you do have the ability to do these types of things. You just have to then, it then becomes the management of then now you're not just managing being a parent, managing a parent with a child. Now you're a tech manager. Now you're managing infrastructure and now you're managing access, which is fine. And it's nice to have it. It's just so much easier when you can just talk to the kids and be flexible, right? Like now the kids can use their stuff in the bedrooms, right? Now I know that they need some quiet time. Now I know that, you know, they're in middle school. They may do some exploring, but they also need their privacy to focus on their schoolwork or to just be away from their sibling. So we've changed it, we've rolled with it, but the other things are still clear, the expectations, right? We're not asking twice, right? Don't let us catch you doing something wrong. Come to us. Because again, you know, it's all the conversations. Phones, my son does have one, daughter does have one. Got it middle of 5th grade. It's been fine. We check it. We look at the texts. We have it on the Apple family plan. Son will probably get one at the same time, just because we've already sort of set that precedent, which is fine. It's also been really nice. My wife's been back at work, so it's been good. She's been going to the city, so it's been good. Like she's not working from home anymore as much, so it's been good to be able to keep in touch with the kids, especially since there's no payphones. I would totally give them a dime or a quarter, but there's no payphones in the suburbs. Not that there's payphones in the city anymore either. But you know, can't all be like 1980s in Brooklyn. Conversations, you know, just talk to the kids and be there with them and let them know and be firm, right, about your expectations. I know it's tough. If they're not doing the right thing, they get to lose the device, but just that's it. Like that has to be the expectation. But then know that there's flexibility in that, and that what works for a 2nd grader is not going to work for a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th grader, and that you have to roll with that. And the way you can roll and change your expectations is through those conversations. And that's how you know what they're looking at. That's how they know that it's a safe space to come and talk to you about what they're looking at. That's how you can have this dialogue where you know that they're doing the right thing because you're doing it with them. Then just some other resources, a bunch of different stuff. Most of it's common sense media. Some fun nostalgia stuff in here for anyone that cares about what the web used to look like back in the early days, like when I started my career. Some other fun nostalgia stuff, but that's basically it. It's 10:06, but we started about 9:06. So I will have this up later. I have a few minutes, so if anyone you know, has questions or anything, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer questions. But thank you guys for taking the time to hang out.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Quick question. I don't want to hold anyone else, but
No, go for it.
Do you set rules or guidelines for your kids about whether their devices can be in their rooms with them while they sleep? Like, do you take them out at night, or how do you handle that?
So we haven't, but we know that that's a thing. We are, one of the expectations generally in the house is the doors are always open, right? So we want, they don't get to close the doors of their bedrooms. We've said to them, they asked us in the beginning, we had these conversations about, well, I have this, where do I charge it? My daughter was like, what do I charge my phone? Do we do it at the desk like we used to do with our laptops? And we said, all right, so here's the deal. You're a 5th grader. We're giving you this phone. You get a chance. We'll let you plug it in your room and keep it wherever you want. First time we catch you using it after we tell you to turn it off or it's bedtime, comes back out. And she's like, okay. And that's been fine. You know, my son too, it's like, you know, and we also parlay it in the sense of like, they have to charge these things, right? Whether it be their school Chromebook, school iPad. They're like, oh, I want to keep my laptop in my room. Okay, you got to charge it. You're responsible. Well, or I can put it outside. It's like, I'm not responsible for your device. So like you have two choices. You can leave it outside, but you have to remember to walk out to the living room, the dining room, wherever, and charge it. Or you can know that it needs to be off at a certain time and plugged in, and then it makes your life easier because all your stuff is right there. And again, it's just that conversation of, but we were very cognizant of that fact. And that's why we sort of do the doors open thing, and they know. And there's been times where like they've been looking at it too long, or we had to ask them twice. We'll take it away for an hour, for a day, things like that. So they, you know, and they always push the boundaries like kids do. So you sort of set those things of like, oh, I told you 9 o'clock and I saw it was on at like 10:30. All right, so guess what? Tomorrow you don't get it. And they cry and they whatever. And then the next day you say, oh, here it is. And most like they'll be like, oh, I get it back. You go back, yeah. I told you, if you did the wrong thing, I take it away for a day. You did the wrong thing, I took it away for a day, here it back. Are you going to do the wrong thing again? Because the second time you do the wrong thing, I take it away for 2 days. You know, you sort of have that kind of expectation of them, is that like if they keep doing the wrong thing, that the consequence will get worse, because otherwise, if they were on it for an extra hour and they only lose an hour, then they're gonna be like, okay, that's fine. Like I can live with that. But they have to understand that there's sort of these ramifications that happen. So you try it out and roll it. Like I said, be flexible. Like it's okay to be like, I've changed my mind. I'm the parent. I thought I was comfortable with you having your device in your bedroom, but guess what? Now I'm not. And it's okay because I'm old and I pay the bills. Like that's okay to do. And we do that sometimes. And my kids have yelled at me like, but I thought you said, and I'm like, right. I said that yesterday when I felt a lot different than I do today. And I reserve the right to make that change. You know, and obviously, I mean, I have this sort of somewhat joking, somewhat fierce, whatever with my kids, just in terms of like super rigid and whatnot, but everyone will have their own sort of relationship. But there definitely has to be in these constructs, the parent-child dynamic is so critical. Like it has to be like, no, I'm the parent. So there are going to be times where I make these hard decisions and you're not going to like them. And we're all just going to have to move on and deal with the 1 hour, the 1 day, the one whatever, where you don't get the thing, for you to understand that you don't get to set the rules. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Play around, and depending on how old your kids are, I mean, even with little kids, kindergarten, you can talk to them and say, listen, what do you think the rules should be? You know, have them be part of that discussion. Say like, all right, like, what do you think? Like if you drop your iPad, what do you think we should do? What should be the consequence? You know, and sort of develop those expectations alongside them. And they may be like, oh, nothing, buy me a new one. And you're like, yeah, you're funny. You're 6. That's why that's funny. Here's what's really going to happen. But you give them a sense of they have input into what their expectation is, what their consequence is, and how they can then avoid that. So then they have, you know, ownership of that dynamic. And like I said, there's in the presentation, there's a bunch of those like family tech plan sort of templates that have stuff like that. But you could also just kind of wing it yourself. But again, as long as you're sort of consistent on the expectations and consistent on consequences and things like that, then the kids will develop it. And again, it's about keep talking to the kids about it and keep that open line of communication open.
Great technology advice and parenting advice. I have to pop off, but thanks again.
No problem. All right. So if that's it, I'll end this. I will have this up later. I'm sorry that you guys weren't seeing some of the slides, but all the slides will be up, and then the video will be up, and I'll have the slides up on the video later as well. Cool.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.